18. Hawks do not share. Scott Fitzgerald invited us to have lunch with his wife Zelda and his little daughter at the furnished flat they had rented at 14 Rue de Tilsit. I cannot remember much about the flat except that it was gloomy and airless, and that there was nothing in it that seemed to belong to them, except Scott's first books bound in light blue leather with the titles in gold. Scott also showed us a large ledger with all of the stories he had published listed in it year after year, with the prices he had received for them, and also the amounts received for any motion picture sales, and the sales and royalties of his books. They were all noted as carefully as the log of a ship, and Scott showed them to both of us with impersonal pride as though he were the curator of a museum. Scott was nervous and hospitable, and he showed us his accounts of his earnings as though they had been the view. There was no view. Zelda had a very bad hangover. They had been up on Montmartre the night before and had quarreled because Scott did not want to get drunk. He had decided, he told me, to work hard and not to drink, and Zelda was treating him as though he were a killjoy or a spoil-sport. Those were the two words she used to him, and there was recrimination, and Zelda would say, "I did not. I did no such thing. It's not true, Scott." Later she would seem to recall something and would laugh happily. On this day Zelda did not look her best. Her beautiful dark blonde hair had been ruined temporarily by a bad permanent she had gotten in Lyon, where the rain had made them abandon their car, and her eyes were tired and her face was too taut and drawn. She was formerly pleasant to Hadley and me, but a big part of her seemed not to be present, but to be still on the party she had come home from that morning. She and Scott both seemed to feel that Scott and I enjoyed a great and wonderful time on the trip up from Lyon, and she was jealous about it. "When you two can go off and have such simply wonderful times together, it only seems fair that I should have just a little fun with our good friends here in Paris," she said to Scott. Scott was being the perfect host, and we ate a very bad lunch that the wine cheered a little but not much. The little girl was blonde, chubby-faced, well-built, and very healthy-looking, and spoke English with a strong Cockney accent. Scott explained that she had an English nanny because he wanted her to speak like Lady Diana Manners when she grew up. Zelda had hawk's eyes and a thin mouth, and deep South manners and accent. Watching her face, you could see her mind leave the table and go to the night's party and return with her eyes blank as a cat's, and then pleased, and the pleasure would show along the thin line of her lips and then be gone. Scott was being the good, cheerful host, and Zelda looked at him, and she smiled happily with her eyes and her mouth, too, as he drank the wine. I learned to know that smile very well. It meant she knew Scott would not be able to write. Zelda was very jealous of Scott's work, and as we got to know them, this fell into a regular pattern. Scott would resolve not to go on all-night drinking parties and to get some exercise each day and work regularly. He would start to work, and as soon as he was working well, Zelda would begin complaining about how bored she was and get him off on another drunken party. They would quarrel and then make up, and he would sweat out the alcohol on long walks with me and make up his mind that this time he would really work and would start off well. Then it would start all over again. Scott was very much in love with Zelda, and he was very jealous of her. He told me many times on our walks of how she had fallen in love with a French Navy pilot. He had told me the story very many times by now, starting on the trip, and it was his best story no matter how he told it. But she had never made him really jealous with another man since. This spring she was making him jealous with other women, and on the Montmartre parties he was afraid to pass out, and he was afraid to have her pass out. Becoming unconscious when they drank had always been their great defense. They went to sleep on drinking an amount of liquor or champagne that would have little effect on a person accustomed to drinking, and they would go to sleep like children. I have seen them become unconscious, not as though they were drunk, but as though they had been anesthetized, and their friends, or sometimes a taxi driver, would get them to bed. And when they woke, they would be fresh and happy, not having taken enough alcohol to damage their bodies before it made them unconscious. Now they had lost this natural defense. At this time, Zelda could drink more than Scott could, and Scott was afraid for her to pass out in the company they kept that spring and in the places they went to. Scott did not like the places, nor the people, and he had to drink more than he could drink and be in any control of himself, to stand the people and the places. And then he began to have to drink to keep awake after he would usually have passed out. Finally, he had few intervals of work at all. He was always trying to work. Each day he would try and fail. He laid the failure to Paris, the town best organized for a writer to write in that there is. And he thought always that there would be some place where he and Zelda could have a good life together again. He thought of the Riviera, as it was then before it had all been built up, with the lovely stretches of blue sea and the sand beaches, and the stretches of pine woods and the mountains of the Estoril going out into the sea. He remembered it as it was when he and Zelda had first found it before people went there for the summer. Scott told me about the Riviera and how my wife and I must come there the next summer, and how we would go there and how he would find a place for us that was not expensive, and we would both work hard every day and swim and lie on the beach and be brown and only have a single aperitif before lunch and one before dinner. Zelda would be happy there, he said. She loved to swim and was a beautiful diver, and she was happy with that life and would want him to work and everything would be wonderful. He and Zelda and their daughter were going to go there that summer. I was trying to get him to write his stories as well as he could, and not trick them to conform to any formula, as he had explained that he did. "You've written a fine novel now," I told him, "and you mustn't write slop." "The novel isn't selling," he said. "I must write stories, and they have to be stories that will sell." "Write the best story that you can, and write it as straight as you can." "I'm going to," he said. But the way things were going, he was lucky to get any work done at all. Zelda did not encourage the people who were chasing her, and she had nothing to do with them, she said. But it amused her, and it made Scott jealous, and he had to go with her to the places. It destroyed his work, and she was more jealous of his work than anything. All that late spring and early summer, Scott fought to work, but he could only work in snatches. When I saw him, he was always cheerful, sometimes desperately cheerful, and he made good jokes and was a good companion. When he had very bad times, I listened to him about them and tried to make him know that if he could hold on to himself, he would write as he was made to write, and that only death was irrevocable. He would make fun of himself then, and as long as he could do that, I thought that he was safe. Through all of this, he wrote one good story, The Rich Boy, and I was sure that he could write better than that as he did later.